Oh, well, we are live. So let's get things rolling. Thanks so much for joining us, Alexis. I was saying, I don't know whether it was off pod or on pod, that I really genuinely loved reading Liberation as Other People. And for a number of reasons that I want to talk to you about today. But, it's like a kind of welcome back to the podcast. You've been on twice before.
That's true.
Once during the kind of like, beginning of COVID and to talk about Against Purity, and then again to talk about Bhajyanta Mukhopadhyay's oh
Country
my
of
God,
Poxes, that
Country of
brilliant book.
Poxes. Thank
Yeah.
you. I can't believe it dropped out. But yeah, so I've been swimming through your book and thinking about it in relationship to, being kind of in a parasocial connection with you over social media and being a fan of your work for a long time. And I was thinking back to a moment where you wrote on Facebook, this would have been like 3 or 4 years ago, I don't know, that you want a name for the specific kind of care required
Mm.
for like accommodating somewhat chaotic drivers in traffic. And I really like that crowdsourcing of a concept because like that is something that people absolutely deal with every day, yielding
Yeah.
to reckless drivers. To think about it almost like an act of mutual care or something, just like what's required to survive driving, was interesting. And then I was walking my dog, who you met just a minute ago, sort of. And I ran into a friend, and she talked about how in traffic here in Nova Scotia, she often finds it is aggressive or, there's an urgency and a chaos. And that she often likes to just deliberately slow down for that reason, to put,
Mm.
as she said, a single drop of patience into the chaos.
Mm.
And I kind of liked using that as a bit of an anecdote to get into asking about liberation as other people, because it's about, I think, imagining worlds in which we're not subjected to those kinds of everyday kind of pressures, the death machine, really, of settler
Yeah.
colonialism. Um, could you say a bit about this one moment that really jumped out at me in the book, in which you're talking about the need to be defiantly ourselves and
Mm.
to build a world that supports everyone else, also getting ever weirder.
Yeah.
Uh, because you say in the chapter it's about sort of nourishing beautiful specificity for social kind of ends. Could you talk about that, like why that's such a kind of crucial thing in
Yeah.
your theorization here?
I love that you're starting here, Scott. Um, yeah, because there's so much that this really gets into one of the core things. Um, so there's all this stuff that is not in this book that I've been doing kind of intensely over the last 4 years. And one of the things that is really part of it and comes in a little bit is that I got really, really obsessed with Ursula K. Le Guin. And at the same time as I was working on this book, was writing a short book about Le Guin's anarchism and why it's so great. And I a bit was doing this. My partner here in Ottawa says, "You're really trying to like rebuild a metaphysics in the wake of some kind of like profound spiritual crisis that made me lose a lot of my kind of baseline operating system." And Le Guin has been really helpful, sort of existentially helpful. And one of the things that I found beautiful in her work, and then also that I struggle with, is her understanding of what the social world is for, is to create the conditions in which each of us can offer our best to the world, and where the world is there to make that happen. And that when we offer our best thing, um, that automatically creates the best in the world. And this took me down a really long rabbit hole around debates within anarchism, historical European, mostly anarchism, around the relationship between the individual and the collective. which, um, of course, is a long, long question also. And and I got really, really, yeah, interested in holding these two things simultaneously. Um, One is a strand of existential thinking that we see come out in people like Viktor Frankl, who really make this compelling and beautiful argument that all you need to do is exist. That the warrant for your life, like the thing that makes your life worth offering to the world, is simply that it's yours. And there was something about that idea that, and Le Guin's formulation of that what we should do is find our unique thing. In one of her novels, she calls it our cellular function, which has like long trajectories with political philosophy. But it's basically like we don't ask a brain cell to do a liver cell's job. We we want them each to be doing exactly what they do. So for a little while, I got really, really just compelled and committed to that. And I still am. I still really do think that we should have a world in which each person is ever weirder and ever more specific. And I do really, in a bone deep way, think that the thing that we love is the thing that we can offer. And one of the main people that really theorized that is Oscar Wilde. He was an individualist anarchist who believed that the purpose of society was to make art, and that the way that we did that was by being most specifically ourselves and getting ever more specifically that. And I spent a long time being, I still am, very charmed and enraptured with Wilde. And then I started also looking at some of his social context. And I talk in the book about the ways that reading this biography of him, Making Oscar Wilde, I learned more about the way that his individualism was really connected with some inveterate racism and eugenics. And so I talk through discovering that he saw a lot of similarities between the US South, chattel slavery, and the struggle of Irish people against British colonialism. So it's basically coming down to we all should be weird in the weirdest possible way. And we should think about how the selves that we are shaped by the social world that we're in, because we don't want only white enslavers to manifest their selves. And we want actually a way to talk through how racial oppression actually mutilates the self of white people also. So uh, this is one of the tangles that the book is really trying to work through um, all the way through.
Yeah, it is tangled spaghetti, as a friend of mine
Mhm.
said the other day. Tangled spaghetti, this relational thing, right? But it's not a trap. I think like your book is attempting to tell people like it's not a trap. The whole notion of saying liberation is other people and conjuring the notion that hell is other people, which made me think of the wonderful John Early joke where he goes on a run about Postmates and these food delivery services, and how billboard, literally the slogan was just "hate people?" question mark Postmates. And he's like, there's spree shootings all over the place, and these advertisers are marketing convenience through misanthropy, like shared misanthropy. You're trying to kind of say like, empathy's not a trap, relationality is not a trap. But people point out a lot of traps when it comes to sort of climate communications, climate criticism, climate activism. We care a lot about it, so we critique it kind of endlessly. I feel a little bit inundated at times, but your book offered clarity because the main trap you're warning people about, if I can say so, is the trap of individualism, this kind of myth of the individual. And I might, if it's okay, quote like a very quick excerpt. Okay.
Yeah.
So you say complex problems, perhaps definitionally not solvable alone, may also be recalcitrant to no solutions offered by conventional forms of social organization, institutions like states, municipal health units, businesses. Diverse approaches from the worlds of social innovation, social labs, and collaborative problem solving recognize this recalcitrance and seek to stage system spanning forms of collaboration. So, like you're helping people navigate the traps by, in that instance, like prescribing a course of action, I would say. Do you like, is that a mode that you respond to still, that idea of kind of like being self-critical about our own like organizing or communication strategies when it comes to fighting climate change?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think one of the things that really, so I wrote Against Purity, this book that was about the need to not have individual purity politics as a solution to big, complicated problems. And then I spent sort of like 9 years having conversations with people where they were like, I really like that idea, but I don't understand how. Like,
Mm-hmm.
what's the actual practice? Um, and I was reading this really wonderful book that I cite also in this book called What Comes After Entanglement, where the author Eva Jarod says, I really thought about that. People asking, like, how do you actually do this more non-individual collective thing? And Jarod says, it's not enough to just point out that everything's complicated and we're implicated in horrors. We have to actually theorize forms of ethics that are adequate to our politics. And she says something like, luckily, philosophers are working on this. And I was like, great, I really need to read who these philosophers are because that's the thing that I am not doing well enough. And I flipped to the back, and she cites me. And I was like, shit, I need to. um, I guess I need to actually. So that in some way, trying to figure out how do we actually think about climate change is really the seed of this book. Um, and so it's a demobilizing politics of despair to say we cannot understand the full magnitude of climate catastrophe, the extinction crisis. Um, it is extremely complicated. We've already gone past the points that we hoped not to go past, and it's hard to know what to do. Um, so that's like where everyone is. And we know that it's a demobilizing despair pit trap to say, so what are you, Scott, personally going to do to solve that problem? Because um, you can't actually, and you can't. And all these things follow from that, right? So we have these two choices. We can say, I can't solve it, therefore I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to try to enjoy the life that I have for as long as I can. Or you can be like, well, what could solve it? Or like, what does solving even mean? So the thing that I came to feel, and that I really do feel, is that it is not bad news that we can't do it alone. It's great news. It's actually not news. It's never been the case that anything big and complicated was something that individuals could solve through sheer acts of will or being martyrs or being personally pure. That's just never been true. And so it's actually great that we can really witness and see that and practice based on it. Um, And in the book, the two ways that I say this is great news. I follow Miriam Kaba with this phrase that nothing worth doing is worth doing alone. And so it's like, what's worth our life? What's worth our time? Uh, Anything we do is going to need other people. And anything that we want to be effective is going to need other people. So there's a whole chapter that's about how do you deal with just being implicated in horrible things that are objectively evil? Um, and how do you become complicit with a world that resists the evil that we're recruited into against our will? But Actually, my favorite chapter in the book is this chapter about climate feelings. And um, and this is my favorite chapter because it's a place where I'm really engaging with a Nova Scotia philosopher who died young, Sue Campbell, who had what I think is just such a beautiful account of the way that we feel together with other people to create, she calls them free form, idiosyncratic feelings. And finding Sue's work again, I was studying with her. I was her master's student when she was writing this book that I'm really spend a lot of time with. Was so revelatory for me, and her work was so generous because it really allowed me to see the ways that the models of feelings that were offered in thinking about climate change are individualizing, demobilizing, make you feel like you're a bad person if you haven't solved it by now. And like, indeed, if I could personally, just through burning myself out, solve climate change, I would think I would want you, Scott, to say, please do it, Alexis. Like, please solve the problems of the world, even if you really mess yourself up. Um, but I can't. It's not, no one can. So, Sue Campbell's work lets me really think through what are the other kinds of feelings that we ferment or incubate together in social movement spaces that are unpredictable, that don't just resolve into feelings we already know how to have, and that allow us to really continue to have this feeling like we're going to carry on and the world is going to carry on. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that's, a beautiful summary of what the kind of motive force of the book is in some ways, and why it's worth really dwelling with. And, there are multiple ways that I think we could take that. I want to get back to what you kind of pointed to a little bit ago in terms of pointing out some of the traps, a kind of smugness that Matt Huber talked about with me on the podcast, that's characteristic of a certain class. But for a minute, let's revel in this vision that you have, which is very beautiful, that is connected to the fermenting a feeling for the future chapter of the book, where you talk about shared feelings as kind of akin to a language,
Mhm.
which I found revelatory. And I thought we could maybe unpack the idea that, this is a space of strength. It's good news, but it's also, you suggest, a site of exploitation in a way, potential exploitation. Like, you're worried in the book that, quote, the shared formulation of feelings happens in ways that may flatten our affective kind of range.
Yeah.
And you suggest that a lot of these big climate feelings really do what you earlier called the demobilizing politics of despair, especially. So there's power for you in unflattening that
Yeah.
range and sort of seeing how expansive it can get. Can you talk about maybe like the particular three kind of like emergent categories that you, I think, just are
Yeah.
attached to in the book?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, maybe what we should start with is like, because most people don't read philosophy of emotion, which I understand. Uh, so,
Right.
um, so let me start by just sort of explaining that a little bit. Um, because we have this popular conception, and it totally is reasonable that we have it, that, and in the book, I talk about the film Inside Out, which um, you've seen probably, maybe several times.
I mean, I have two kids that came
Yes.
up during that phase of Pixar, and we even went to go see the sequel in the
Yeah.
theater.
Yeah.
Not nearly as good, but you make good use of it
Yeah.
in the book, as many do. Like, it's a good sort of reference for these
Yeah.
debates, right?
And it's a film that was made with some like
Yeah.
some real like theorists of emotion, right? So
Hmm.
it's forwarding a theory of feeling that's grounded in research. And that research imagines that basically we have um, clusters of feelings. The film is a film about, for people who haven't seen it, it's about a kid who's learning to sort of work with her emotions. And it's pictured inside her head. There's little versions of herself, and there's one that's like angry, and there's one that's sad, and there's one that, and they can come and get in the driver's seat. And if the angry one is in the driver's seat, like there might need to. So this model of the homunculus that comes and drives is it's a really common version of thinking about feeling. And Campbell calls it an internalist version. So it's like you have your feelings, they're formed already, and they can sort of step into the driver's seat. And um, we see this vision, this model of selfhood, actually, not just emotion, percolating all over. So I think that the recent ascendancy of internal family systems is an example of sort of these like fairly bounded versions of what's happening internally coming to the fore and getting expressed. And so Campbell does this thing that is just absolutely, um, I I used to think that it was simple and that I understand it, and I still sometimes think that I haven't quite grasped its full complexity. Um, the book where she does this is called Interpreting the Personal, and it's a pretty technical philosophy of emotion book that I've gotten a lot of people to read, and they're like, "Yeah, Alexis, it's way more boring than you made it sound." But anyway, really love it. Uh, she says this is a wrong vision of feeling. Um, and I can go down a nerdy sub theme about affect theory and philosophy, but maybe for now I'll just stick with. Campbell says this is not how emotions work. She says we actually don't have feelings all alone. We only have feelings if we have interpretive others who help us individuate the feelings. So we're always feeling with others. And so there's a lot of things that we can say and think about that. But the the politics of that mean, and she's clear, like it's not like there's someone who's like an evil, like, I'm going to make you feel. But she says, notice that if the feelings that were offered are, um, if they fall into these big bucket feelings, she calls them, so anger, sadness, you know, desire, love, um, if someone comes to us with an interpretive frame that then, if it's really true that we feel with other people, the interpretive frames they offer can open us up or shut us down. And if the feelings that they're offering line up with established um, or conservative modes, then it matters very much how we feel. Um, the example she gives, I think, is really complicated. It's of a feminist consciousness raising group, and someone comes in, and she's taking this from another feminist philosopher, Naomi Sheeman. If someone comes to the group and says, I'm just having a really hard time with my family. I love my kids. I love my husband. It matters a lot to me to give them good, nourishing food and the kind of like stable house that I never had growing up. Like a place where they know that like their clothes are going to be clean and there always will be enough to eat. And if they need me, I'll be there. And at the same time, I'm just like, my husband just simply does not notice when the laundry needs to be done. And if I don't make a really detailed grocery list, like the cheese that the kids need in order to eat their lunch, they just simply will not eat it without this cheese. We just won't have it. And I can't, it's like I just feel like this kind of weird resentment, but I feel proud that I remember the cheese. So she has this kind of like complicated set of feelings in this imaginary example, but you can. probably I've had conversations almost exactly like
Oh,
this with
yes.
people.
Yeah.
And Campbell says if the people in the feminist consciousness raising group say to her, yeah, that feeling that you're having, that's anger. You're mad, and that's justified. You're carrying too much of the mental load. There's whole books about this. Like, that's feminist anger. That does capture something that maybe she's not feeling, and that's interpretive justice, right? That is helpful. That's good. And it doesn't capture, it flattens out the part of feeling really moved and it being like deeply meaningful to offer care to her kids that she didn't receive as a child. It flattens out some of the ways, the things that are also getting mobilized against her, right? So Campbell says we need to have a way of being an interpretive space that offers the anger, but also acknowledges and names the love, the bitterness, the feelings that are too inchoate to actually put into a stable category. So those are freeform feelings. Those are idiosyncratic feelings. And most of our examples are less liberatory, right? So someone says, yeah, that guy's creepy. You know, he's always hitting on me. If everyone around her says, he's just friendly, right? That's a form of hermeneutic violence where the interpretive space for her feelings is getting shut down. We can we can
Yeah.
look at lots of these.
Hmm.
So I think that the feeling space that we're offered in climate feelings is often a feeling space where it matters and it's really wonderful that people are naming climate anxiety, climate grief, that talking about feelings really is good for us to do in thinking about climate stuff. But if the only feelings we learn to feel are grief, resignation, even some of the sort of neologisms, like there's a neologism called solastia, which is the grief for landscapes that are forever gone. So what, you know, in some ways it doesn't matter if we have just like better names for it. What Campbell thinks and what I think is that we need to have interpretive spaces where we can have more complicated climate feelings. So that's one part, just to be able to actually feel with each other tremendous grief and a sense that it would be easier to just give up or whatever is happening, right? But also to recognize, and this is the fermenting part, that if the only feelings we're being given are grief, anxiety, despair, those are actually a pretty limited palette and they fall into some pretty established feeling states. So in the book, I give some examples of what I think are freeform feelings that I have seen or experienced or seen modeled in collective movement spaces where people are offering modes of feeling that are much more complicated and that give us more footing for holding our complicated freeform feelings and moving with them into a world that doesn't end, where we're doing something else than just grieving it. Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, I mean, I'm mostly just affirming what you're saying, especially in terms of, moving into a world that doesn't end is such a succinct way of putting it here. Because that does feel like the world we're in already in some ways is a world that's ending. And of course, you engage with folks, indigenous theorists like Kyle White, who point out that this is by no means the first time the world has ended for a people. Um, but I want to give you an opportunity to finish your point. I think there was like a number two that was coming, perhaps.
Hmm. Yeah, so the fermenting part
Yeah,
is just like how do we do that, you know?
that's right.
And
Yeah.
so well, maybe I'll just give one of the examples of the feelings
Yeah.
that
Oh, that's
I
right.
think is,
There are
yeah, because
three.
that's where you asked me to do that, and then I took us
If
on
it's
this long, long
okay.
detour.
I mean, spoiler alert. These are three pretty badass feelings that we're
They're
talking
good
about.
feelings, right?
Yeah.
Um, well, maybe I'll do the Asada Shakur one because the mate one I've gotten a little bit better at not crying when I talk about it. But um, so Asada Shakur, Black liberation struggler, died not too long ago in exile in Cuba. Um, and there's this wonderful song called Committed to Life that's by a band, Asian Dub Foundation, where they sample an Asada Shakur um, talk. And just, everyone should just go listen to it. It's really great. Um, the song is great. The talk is great. Her voice is great. Uh, she says, I'm committed to life. Um, and there's so much that I would have been. Um, she says, I'm a reluctant struggler. I'm a reluctant fighter. And there's so many things that I would have done if I had not had to struggle. Like struggle has been forced on me by oppression. Um, and she says, but you just have to do it. You can't get away from it. Because to do that, to just abandon it, is to enact cowardice and to be subservient to evil. And so she says the only way to live on this planet at the moment with any human dignity is to struggle. So this is just such a complicated feeling, right? And it names so much, right? It names that it's not just that people who are doing anti-oppression work just like it because we're annoying. um, but actually, it's been forced on us by oppression. Um, I'm in my side life, I'm a functional potter. And one of the things that I did a couple of years ago was I was invited to contribute to someone who was making an art exhibit that was living spaces after abolition. So she was like imagining what would just like an ordinary person's house look like in a world where we didn't have police or prisons. Um, and uh, I I made these mugs that said Asada Shakur. She says in this quote, I could have been a sculptor, a carpenter, or a gardener. Um, and I made these mugs that say Asada Shakur, sculptor, carpenter, gardener, because I was picturing like it used to be when you got your roof done, you would get like you know, um, Seymour Curtis roofing mug. They would give.
Oh, sure.
And I was picturing like after the revolution, Asada Shakur, she would still want to like share, like if you need some sculpting done, or like I could build something for you, or
Mm-hmm.
I like gardening. I could just picture there being these
Mm-hmm.
mugs. Um,
Absolutely.
so you can picture like a world where that wasn't the case, where we didn't have to be oriented like this.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but when she talks about this feeling, it's also this feeling of like, it is good. It's good to struggle.
Mm.
It's a way to live
That's
with
the
this
tough part.
specific kind of dignity, you know?
Yeah.
So that feeling is, we can have that in climate struggle, right? We
Mm-hmm.
can say, look, I would like to just enjoy a warm day
Mm-hmm.
and not have it be a reminder that um, global temperatures are beyond human endurance.
Right.
But this is the world I'm in. And
That's right.
so, given this world I'm in, there is human dignity in
Mm.
participating together with others in trying to make things otherwise. So it's a much more complicated feeling than climate grief, you
Yeah.
know? And there's just a million of these feelings. Like, it's
Mm-hmm.
not just that these three feelings that I offer in
No.
the chapter are like, these are the feelings. It really, the thing that I most care about and that I love most is this sense that we can become better incubators for each other of freeform feelings that are unexpected and that open avenues out
Hmm.
into something that we can't predict.
Right. Yeah, and I think like the point in part is simply like we must feel. We must, as Anoni said, as part of their recent concert series, we must allow ourselves to feel the feelings that we are feeling.
Yeah.
And there, you write in the book that attempting to live with consciousness about how our lives contribute to destroying the earth throws many of us into a spiral of overwhelmed dissociation or individualized numbness. And that names, a kind of generalized, I mean, you name it. I can't say it better, right? It does sort of nail the feeling that a lot of folks have as we, see so much climate devastation and steel ourselves to it.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, I sort of just agree that these interpretive frames are really valuable, but that they're not everything. That we do need what you call feeling spaces, which it sounds like is what Sue Campbell is largely writing about. But like, I wonder about art in particular, and whether Campbell has sort of a theory of art. I watched a film recently that really got under my skin that was explicitly about climate grief. First Reformed. Have you seen this
Mm-mm.
film? It's intense. I don't know if I would recommend it. It's incredibly depressing, but it takes seriously these feelings of it's the end of the world, right? That it's over. Yeah, and it's also a reflection on Christian ethics and like capitalist kleptocracy and climate breakdown and all of these things. There are films that are, I think, quite hopeful in terms of the kind, affects on offer in the narrative. There's an Icelandic comedy, Woman at War. There's a French animated film, Arco. I think like what these films do for me is they provide, first of all, like some form of community experience. Like if you go
Mhm.
see them at a theater, especially if there's any sort of like facilitated discussion, it's very valuable. And they sort of allow you to feel imaginatively less stuck on what you're seeing, which is the apocalypse in some sense, right? And to envision alternative futures. Um, like, have you seen meaningful experiments in narrating our relationship to climate breakdown? And do you think we could benefit from more experiments in representing what the climate crisis evokes for us?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I've been working with in a one of my other projects is a project about writing as thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm.
so it's been also just in teaching in a university in the moment where everyone's like, no one needs to write anything anymore. People can just get chatbots to do their breakup texts. And uh, it's been like weirdly existentially affirming for me to say, yeah, everything that we thought we needed to do in the academy, we maybe don't. So, like, we don't need to have like final papers where we black box all of the work that goes into a paper. And I've been a writing teacher since more than 20 years. So I've always been really interested in teaching writing and helping people have a better relationship with their writing. And I've come come to really have this commitment that actually it's great news that we shouldn't have people just generate text. Like that generating a text is not the point of writing. Actually, writing is a practice of thinking that's a relational practice. And so, one of the ways that I'm most interested in how we use art and think with it is in nurturing and building people's expressive possibilities as something that happens collaboratively. So, I've been doing things here like at the Ottawa Public Library, I gave a workshop for teens on climate writing, where we did some work with thinking. I talked about freeform feelings and we did some work actually like trying to think through how we could be and become good interpretive spaces for our own complicated, inchoate, undefined feelings. how we could offer those to each other, what that looked like. So that's one of the things that I'm really interested in is how do we build our own capacities to practice art making, at least as much as we practice art receiving. And so that's one part. The film that I've been most inspired by, I spent a little bit of time at a an occupied zone in Dijon in France, called the Quartier Libre des Lentilliers. So this is an occupation that has recently been legalized after 15 years, contingently legalized, in Dijon, where it was a market garden, about 15 hectares, and little garden plots also of community members. And they occupied it and then set up collective structures. So it's about 125 people who live there. And one of the things they did was make this film called Une île et une nuit, so an island and one night. And this is a fictional film. It's not a documentary, but it aimed to represent their life, their form of life. This film was collectively made in general assemblies. They storyboarded it, made decisions about cuts, and it is such a high quality film. It's like amazing, really, really wonderful. And it runs on this model of normally only people who live in the Lentillier and who participated in making the film can show it. So I've had the really great honor of being, for a while, I was the only one in North America who was allowed to show it as a friend. And there's now one other person, Faye, in Montreal, who can show it. And when I've shown this film places to people, it's been incredibly beautiful to see the way that wherever it is, it's, we're usually showing it in a community space. Like I showed it at Glitterbean, actually, in Halifax. And so a community space where people are engaged in their own struggle to imagine that the world isn't going to end. And to see the ways that that the film helps imagine not like I want to be one of the Lentilliers, but to ask, what would I be if I was living where I am in a way that imagined that the apocalypse wasn't the end? So that question, right? I mean, I think that's always the question that we can ask both the art that we take in and the way that we engage it. So is this a form? Is this giving us a shape of something that provokes that question? Not, oh, it's expressed that so well, that's the end. But if I were to do something that would respond to that, what question is that work asking me that my life is the answer for? Um, and what if I live my life? One of the people that I talk about is this Alan Caprow, he did these happenings in New York City that were he called them, instead of making art that was frozen, you made art that was like living your life. So how do we think about being present in the world with the world dynamically so that we're actually living our life as a practice of art? This for me is like really helps us do something different. That I think
Mm-hmm.
my other obsession in the book is this insight that the world shapes us, right? It delimits our capacities, like what we can actually do. And this is, also 25-year long obsession with Angela Davis's conception of freedom. But we shape the world that shapes us. So our choices are limited. The feelings that are offered to us are delimited. The art that comes to us can open us up or close us down. If we live in this way where we're responding with our whole self, with our uniqueness, our weirdness, Does this piece of art spark something where we say, I don't have to be the same as that, or like that doesn't have to end my set of feelings. Sometimes I think climate art is more mourning or a scream of rage than, and that really matters. Um, but I think sometimes the work that we end up receiving is taking that in a mode that closes down action and tells us that there's nothing we can do, rather than opening this question of, I will not be the same as that. And it doesn't have to be like someone being super inspirational, right? That also would be kind of wooden. But it's this question of like, how do we how do we respond
Hmm.
as though we have one of the answers?
Yeah, and we I think both want to just see more of what you're describing, which is this like very autonomous DIY, improvisational and collective art making about the moment we're in, this epic turning point. And it kind of leads into this question I have about in some ways, the joke that climate action, climate change has become sort of professionalized academically, that it's an endless book project. This is a joke often attributed to Bill McKibben. I want to talk about that question of discourse, but like just to build, first of all, from what you're talking about, which is stemming too from this kind of enshrining of what you call the weird, freakish, the unfit for society, the cringe, like looking to these pockets for new ideas, for inchoate sorts of feelings. Um, I think like that to me is valuable because I've long felt that climate communication, we'll say broadly, could really do to be kind of weirder and funnier and kind of more ironic in some ways, because it is, first of all, more accessible than just
Mhm.
pure mournfulness or pure anger, which is sometimes alienating, but also because, if people are seeing things that they can't almost sort of, internalize, cognize, like massive wildfires, in the background of people just sort of sunning on the beach and having their normal day, like when the world itself has become this surreal, uncanny scene.
Yeah.
I feel like, an affective capacity or a language for describing how weird that moment is
Yeah.
would be really valuable. But it's yet to emerge, and I think like the conditions, as you keep pointing to, like the conditions really need to be right for us to have the kind of almost like public luxury
Mm.
of art providing a sense of community and community resilience. But yeah, maybe back to this question of climate action as an endless book project. I don't know. You've written about, as I've kind of gestured to already, like the need for a politics deep and expansive enough that there's room for imperfection,
Mhm.
which is what I was kind of just speaking to a second ago. And I kind of wondered if we could juxtapose this with what you call the know-it-all reaction,
Mhm.
right? Like a politics that's deep and expansive enough doesn't seem to have much room for the sort of pedantic smugness of the
Yeah.
person who's just sort of going to center their own command of the discourse, I guess, or their own affects.
Yeah.
Like, how would allowing in more imperfection expand the scope of what's doable? And how can we kind of change the publics we have to accommodate that?
Yeah. Well, so, I often think about Dean Spade, who often is just one of the people who points out that in order to really meet the situation we're in, we need movements of hundreds of millions of people. And we're not going to get that with just um, a handful of righteous and grumpy activists in every city. Um, so one of the things that I think is can be a emotionally satisfying, even as it's horrifying experience is to be the one who really can just like run down how bad things are. And that's also a way that, I'm an academic, like I know well the seductions and pleasures of dissociating through intellectualization. I am in therapy. Uh, the thing that happens though is there's two parts. One is when someone is just starting to get involved, if they're met with people who say, you have to like learn a lot more in order to be able to even say something in this space, they will feel um, pushed out of the space, or they'll feel like someone else is an expert. And that's a reasonable thing, right? It's in some ways it's reasonable that in climate spaces people are like, look, there are climate scientists, and not everyone has to understand the science. Like we can, you know, we can trust other people to say like, yes, climate catastrophe is real. So um but the know-it-all reaction does it's demobilizing in that it makes everyone feel like they have to know it all in order to say, I think we should change our course. And it can be this model, which I think comes out of like so many people in climate movements. Many people, many people in climate movements come out of university spaces. And in university spaces, we think that knowledge is always good and more knowledge is better. Um, Knowledge is good, knowledge is better. Um, but when you really start grounding instead in environmental justice spaces, you see the kinds of knowledge and the kinds of connectivity that people are making don't have to take this form of starting from information. So that move toward turning toward feeling is also something that lets us name stuff, and it lets us think about different modalities. And so for me, like thinking about climate catastrophe from an environmental justice stance regrounds us in why knowledge matters, why information matters. I spent some time in March in Buffalo, New York, which is the place that environmental justice activists really, many of them Black people, identified toxic sludge and caused the Environmental Protection Agency in the US to exist, and the existence of what's called Superfund sites, so places that need significant environmental amelioration. And people who are living in these places, downstream places, which all of our places ultimately are, right? Downstream of coal plants, nuclear waste deposits, toxic sludge from, you know, the production of film, all these things. Tuning ourselves to that lets us ask, like, why are we doing something? And actually, like every climate activist I know, the reason that they want to have understanding of how many parts per million of carbon dioxide have what effect is because they love the world. They care about the world. But it can get lost if we focus only on knowing more and more and more and more. It's also been a really active demobilizing strategy from the right to say, like, what you can't take any action until we know the full ramifications. And it's like, this is a complex system, and these are wicked problems where anything we do has other effects, and we will never be able to fully predict them all. So that imperative is always going to just shut us down. So yeah, so the know-it-all reaction doesn't get us anywhere. The other main one that I think we see happen sometimes is the fuck it reaction. And I talk about friends that I have who are good people, but who are just like, yeah, I can't do anything about global warming and I'm not going to try. I'm flying to the Galapagos Islands to see the amazing things there while they still exist, even though I know that flying there will help destroy them. Um, and it's like kind of grim, but actually, like, I think all of us have someone in our life who has taken that choice, and I understand it.
Yeah.
Um,
No, I have people close to me who who look at the complicity problem, and the fact that the machine seems to be unstoppable,
Yeah.
and say, whatever, bottled water, so be it, like, et cetera, right? But yeah, I think you're right to point out that the sorts of like pedagogies that we need, I think, the sorts of stories and so on that would benefit folks in terms of like trying to use this, I mean, this critical decade that is almost over as a kind of portal for dwelling with these more complex climate emotions, that, are sharpening in this moment in ways that the fossil fuel companies actually knew they would. They knew there would be a correlation between this felt ecological catastrophe and, a massive shift in public opinion and public sentiment against fossil fuels. Your book, I think, gives an interesting blueprint for, how we can fight the status quo without it being about belligerence. Like the language of the reluctant warrior is so resonant for that reason. Like, so I can't say enough about how enriching I felt it was reading the book, and then also just like talking to you about how, yes, we're in a moment where the horrors persist, but as the meme goes, so do we.
So do we. Yeah.
And there's a reason it says we,
Yeah.
right? It's not
Yeah.
like the horrors persist, but fuck it. It's
Yeah.
like the horrors persist, and
Yeah.
so do we.
Yeah.
And that represents a really deeply, yeah, complex ethical
Yeah.
set of decisions that your book is trying to really work through in ways that I haven't seen before. So thanks
Mm.
for putting it together and for making the time.
Yeah. Such a pleasure. Yeah. I mean, I think for me, really, the core thing is like the people we're up against do think that the world's going to end.
Oh,
They
yeah.
do. And they don't mind. They're kind of happy about it. And we, when we say, what if not? Right? What if, like, to everyone's surprise, something else happened? This is a fundamentally different, like, and we will only be able to do that with other people, and that's great news. So that's kind of like I really have come out of writing this book just feeling actually like I feel better. I feel I feel a lot of possibility. I genuinely feel like it is not that everything has to die in fire and ash. Um,
No,
so that's good news. It's just really also hard.
it's hard. There's no end to the struggle, which is a common refrain as well in your book, right?
Yeah.
Trying to like wrestle with the idea that like, okay, freedom is a constant struggle. What does that look like? And are there emotions attached to that experience, even euphoric ones, that are worth sort of championing in this moment, which is something I'll be, that'll be percolating for a long while as I try and figure out, like so many in my position, what it is that is worth, like I guess, saying about this crisis. Sometimes, as my colleague says, you feel like you're screaming into the void.
Yeah.
But these live events, despite the lack of attendance, have felt different to the extent that like they have been unpredictable. There's like a level of I'm just putting it out into the world,
Mm-hmm.
unfiltered, unedited, obviously carefully crafted and
Yeah.
prepared, but nonetheless, just to kind of yeah, open, like keep things open, like
Yeah.
as an end in itself, on some level. But yeah, I won't take too much more of your time here. But if folks that are connected online happen to have any questions, I might share those with you. Let me have a quick look here. Do we have no comments in the chat? So, but they are currently catching up with the live feed. I will let you go, and just thank you again. I want to come back to maybe using this book in a couple of different ways, in things I'm working on. So I'll kind of float those with you
Amazing. Well, thank you
offline.
so much for your energy and reading and time. It's been really lovely to talk to you.
Awesome.